I was saying in that meditation was that clarity doesn't require effort in relationships. It just requires honesty. And we're going to talk about the shadow and repressed and suppressed material more in the metal element class. That's more in that realm. We do more shadow work really in the autumn because if you just stay doing shadow work all the time, and there is a temptation to do that because the unconscious has so much material. It's kind of like picking at a wound, you can stay in this wounded mode for all of eternity. And it's not terribly helpful. The shadow requires layers to develop a relationship to it. And I'm distinguishing that because in talking about the wood element, the central tenet of the wood element, if this is the only thing you take from the next 30 minutes, it's face everything, avoid nothing. If that's the one thing you remember and take with you, then you got a lot of material there. But it's different to face everything and avoid nothing than to do shadow work. And I'll distinguish between the two in the metal element class. So when I say face everything, avoid nothing, what I'm really talking about is integrity. And all of this five element work is in service to the science and art of integrity. What does it mean to be an upright human being? To be, um, I mean, in Taoist medicine, it's referred to as uprightness, this quality of living with both virtue and clarity, but also integrity to your unique life, to your what's called the Ming or your destiny. What wishes to unfold through you? How does the Tao uniquely express through your unique makeup? So, this quality of integrity, of facing everything and avoiding nothing, this is really what the wood element is about. So, when we talk about the wood element, we are talking about the springtime. And if you remember in the introductory class, when I distinguished between Eros and Agape, Eros is the creative life force that's moving through us. You could call it Shakti. It is prana. It's the upwards movement of life out of the depths, out of the unconscious, out of the ocean of yin, out of pure potential, into the authentic and creative expression of life. It's a very powerful and potent energy. It's a transformative energy. And its wish is to move. It's like the sun rising over the horizon of the ocean. It's the energy of the first spring shoots in the springtime, when all of the plant kingdom, the wood element's really about the plant kingdom bursting into life, the greenery of life erupting and expressing itself. It represents the spring. It's the dawn, the first light in the morning. Um, it is forwards facing and upwards moving. It is upright. It is alert. And it is about growth. The springtime is about growth. And it really is about having the courage to see everything. It's the saying to oneself, may no stone be unturned. I'm willing to see everything. I want to see everything. And this is the evolutionary force, right? We have 14 billion years of the universe saying yes. And that consciousness, that expression of the evolutionary impulse, we are that impulse because we are an expression of the evolution of consciousness as human beings. So when we turn and face and say yes to life, when we align with that wood element energy that says yes to growth, yes to evolution, we're tapping in to the voice of the authentic self that says, I'm here to grow, full stop or full start. I'm here to grow and for the creative and expressive life force to move through me. So wood is the force that moves life forward. It evolves life. It's the seed that's splitting underground, splitting out of the sprout, splitting out of the seed. Or another image you see in the classic texts is the shoot pressing through the concrete. You're walking down the sidewalk and you see that little green shoot pushing through. The force required to push through concrete towards the light, right? This is very powerful energy, right? It's the spring is the mating season. So if sexuality is about creating life, ultimately, it is the power of our capacity to create life and what it means for the life force to move through us. Wood energy is not comfortable. It wants to push boundaries. It wants to push the edge. It wants to break free from the shell. Um, wood is really truth in motion. And when I say truth, I mean evolution. Life wants to evolve, right? The famous line from Jurassic Park, life will find a way, right? This pushing forwards, this evolutionary impulse, um, is not comfortable. It's not intended to be. So if water teaches surrender, like we talked about last week, wood teaches responsibility. And the responsibility is to integrity. So to the highest level of our insights, the highest level of our revelations, of our realization through practice, through meditation, through mindfulness practice, when we have realizations and insights, we have a responsibility to carry those into the way we live. And that's integrity, right? People love to think that they're living a spiritual path and they attend ayahuasca sits and third eye activations and aromatherapy explosions and tantric kundalini classes and on and on and on. But then they don't live with integrity. And they would make far more progress if they just committed wholly and fully mind, body, spirit to I will live in integrity to my realizations. That is a more powerful spiritual path than experiences because the ego loves experiences. There's never enough experiences for the ego, right? One more sit, one more thing I got to do. If you really commit to integrity to your realizations and insights, that is that's the rocket fuel, right? To real growth. And that's what it means to face everything and avoid nothing. So to live with the wood element fully is to renounce the right to avoid what must be faced for the sake of freedom and integrity. I had this one Swami I lived with in my mid-20s, and he said, the teaching comes down to one thing. Um, it's precisely that which you believe you can't let go of that you must. So, a wood question is, what's the one thing that if you changed it, or if you let it go, it would transform your life and the life of everybody you're in contact with. And we always know it's the one thing we've been putting off for 20 years. It's the one addiction we haven't put down. It's the one thing we haven't started. It's the conversation with that one parent we haven't had. It's the thing. And that thing is like my precious. It's Gollum's precious. I don't owe anything but that thing, right? And so this facing everything is to really get intimately in touch with what is it that I'm avoiding? What is it that I'm not facing in myself or in my relationships? It's an intensity of integrity that requires really a lot of humility. It takes a lot of humility to see all the shit we walk around with inside of our minds and our emotions and the way that we live. It takes a lot of humility, you know? So relationships are where avoidance patterns become visible. In many ways, the greatest teachings of relationships is seeing where we avoid. Um, healthy wood energy can help a partner see their avoidance for the sake of integrity and uprightness. So this is something I've learned a lot about as a wood type, is that I'm always pushing for growth, pushing to see the thing, like pushing for integrity and uprightness and what's being avoided here. And that energy requires a tactfulness and a humility because for somebody who's more like a water type or a metal type, that feels like an intense pressure and they will avoid more and withdraw and kind of run away from it. So there's this term in the Yellow Emperor's Classic. It's called the Huangdi Neijing. It's a very important Chinese medicine text, very old text. It's around 2,000 years old. And it talks about something called zheng qi. And zheng can be translated loosely or roughly as upright qi. And there's a line in it that says, when zheng qi is strong, pathogenic qi cannot invade. So this talks about our uprightness and our integrity. And it's not a thing we cultivate, zheng qi. You don't work on developing uprightness. It's inner coherence. And inner coherence means that we have integrity. We don't say one thing and do another. We don't have ideas that are totally in conflict that we just walk around with and live out. We really examine things. Am I aligned with that belief? Am I aligned with that behavior? Are my values intact in the way that I live, right? And so really zheng qi is inner integrity. And like I said earlier, you can't grow spiritually without integrity. It is kind of the beginning of real practice is living with integrity. And that's what Wood Element is about. So in relationships, wood governs growth. Again, it's the springtime, but it also governs directionality. It governs vision. It governs planning and decision making. So archetypally, or in terms of personality types, we all know wood type people because they're pretty obvious. They are the visionaries, the initiators, the leaders, the pioneers, the mavericks. They often show up as entrepreneurs and CEOs, and they're hard-pressing people. They get shit done, right? And they can be intense, they can be bullish, they can be hard to deal with, they can be ornery, they can get frustrated easily, be irascible. They want to make things happen. They want growth. They're the time is always now. Okay, let's go, right? And they can be intense people, but they're also extraordinary cheerleaders and they make things happen in the world, right? And they they have a capacity to make decisions, to make a plan, to have a vision. You know, they have a profound capacity to say this way, this is the way we're going. And so they make things happen. Um, the wood element, it corresponds to the liver. And the liver is a very complex, it's the most complex organ in the body. It has over 500 metabolic and regulatory and detoxification functions. It's an incredibly complex organ, right? And it's the hub of direction and coordination. So it takes an unbelievable amount of information and it distills it into, you could say, decision making, right? And coordinating things. So this is kind of this vision and purpose and future orientation and where are we going? What are we doing? This is how wood element types orient. It's the aspect of the psyche that expresses, communicates, and creates directionality. So if in a relationship there isn't growth and direction and purpose, wood elements get frustrated. And the predominant emotion or energy of wood element when growth is not happening is frustration. And if growth continues to not happen, it will turn into anger. So, it needs growth. It needs a container for growth and movement. But at its highest expression, wood is not forceful. It's integrity in action. So integrity is so important to wood. Like I said earlier, so wood governs anger, but anger is not pathological. In our culture, we really repress a lot of anger. You're not supposed to show anger. And of course, if it comes out as rage, anger is not it's pathological. But anger is a signal that truth is known, but it's not being acted upon. Or in simple terms, anger is your body's way of saying something here needs to change. And if you don't initiate that change, you don't embrace that change, it will turn into deep frustration and eventually depression, right? So there's this interesting relationship with the wood element around the need for change and direction and movement, combined with the humility to face everything, right? So people who go to AA, what's the first thing they have to say? Hi, I'm Tom Jones and I'm an alcoholic, right? There's the acknowledgement. Somebody has to acknowledge first something which takes great humility to stand up in front of a room of people and say, "Hey, I ain't perfect," you know? So there's a version of that requires change, that is required for any form of change. To see ourselves clearly, we have to practice humility. And that courage of the wood element is to have the humility to say, I'm avoiding things in life. I'm avoiding things in myself. What am I avoiding? And what can change here? So, in the way that wood loves, in any relationships, family relationships, partnership relationships, it loves through growth and movement. So, wood elements have to name what must be faced. If there's something dysfunctional in a dynamic, they need it to be acknowledged. They need to communicate it. Wood elements need to talk things through. They have to face things. They cannot be in a relationship, any form of relationship, where there's suppressed material. They'll get angry. And they also love through encouraging potential and evolution. Somebody with a strong wood archetype is not going to be happy in any dynamic if there is not growth and evolution and potential expressing in the relationship. If it feels like there's too much inertia or nothing happening, they'll leave or they'll get pissed off, basically. Um, they also, wood elements hold vision. So if you think about a tree, the leaves and buds on the tree are like our wishes, our aspirations, our dreams. And that's the Hun spirit in Taoism. The Hun is the spirit that oversees our ability to dream, to envision, to author our lives, to create a plan, and to pursue and explore our deepest desires, our deepest wishes. So, if in relationship there isn't a sense of we're doing something together, we're dreaming, we're planning, we're creating, then the wood elements will feel stifled, like they don't know where to be in relationship. Wood people, they bond through shared direction. They don't want appeasement or placation. They don't want it to be easy. It doesn't need to be easy. What they want is shared direction and growth. So what woods need is they need honest feedback. They want honesty. They want forward motion. They want respect for conscience and integrity. And sometimes if something's undecided, because wood elements are all about decision making, they need some space to decide and act. If wood types can't make decisions and take action, they can get very stifled, stagnant, right? So a little bit about misattunements in relationship for wood types. Last week we talked about how water attunes through loyalty and depth, right? Wood types, they attune through direction and truth, right? So they need directionality. And that's kind of their love language is directionality and truth and growth. And what are we doing here? Where are we going? Right? Is there a plan? Are we moving somewhere? And next week we'll talk about fire, which loves through presence and feeling, through shared feeling, right? It's all the heart energy. If somebody's described as livery, right, or hot-headed or red in the face, that is the chi of the liver rising to the face. And where chi goes, the blood flows, right? So when you get hot-headed, when your face is red with blood, it's because that anger, that wood energy is rising up. And often people who have a lot of wood energy, they drink a lot of alcohol because they're trying to suppress that wood energy back down. And that suppressing the liver chi over time will create, liver cirrhosis or liver diseases, but it also makes your face more red, right? Because it's all this repressed energy. So wood types have to express. Um, some misattunements with wood, with some of the other elements, are when you're trying to calm wood energy down instead of listening to the message that they're trying to communicate. Wood types don't calm down by being told to calm down. They calm down by being heard, right? So, I mean, you kind of get a picture of wood types. They're intense people, and maybe you're dating one, or maybe your boss is one, who knows? But they they do not, if their anger is labeled as aggression, they usually don't receive that well. They want to be heard and received. Um, when a wood type is told to let go, which is a very metal element response, metal, what does metal do? What does an axe do to a tree, right? It cuts it down. So if they're told to let go when something needs to be faced, they're going to get pissed off, right? So they want things faced. They want to look at things. Um, And the care that another element might, for a wood type, it might be sincere, but the language is wrong, right? And so they require a special handling, so to speak. And if a wood type has cultivated themselves, they can be a tremendous force for benevolence and good. But if they are undeveloped, they can be angry assholes. They're difficult people to deal with. In the Chinese classics, they're described as army generals, right? The general in the army who has the vision of everything and knows what to do and tells people what to do. And there needs to be a general or a leader in the army, or else it's just chaos. But if you think about army generals in books or movies, they're not the easiest people, right? They're usually pretty intense. So a little bit about shadow, the shadow of wood. The shadow is really around avoidance and arrogance and timidity. So the wood shadow is repression. So all that strong energy can get repressed. So when wood is in excess, it can become belligerent or arrogant. And the way this usually shows up is the need to be right, right? They're more interested in being right than they are in being free. And they need to be right. And they're going to make sure you know they're right. And they'll probably be a little bit arrogant about it. And they're going to force the outcome of rightness. They can also be controlling of others. They can project onto others, right? And so it can be this sort of controlling, pugilistic sort of arrogance, you know? And that's when wood's in excess. Now, when it's in deficiency, it comes out as timidity or collapse. So this usually shows up as chronic indecision. And the gallbladder, the liver and the gallbladder, of course, are closely related. The gallbladder energy is about decision making. So if wood is deficient, a person just can't make up their mind. And they're constantly stuck in ambiguity and indecision. And they avoid meaningful choices and they tend to resign, and they call it acceptance. I've accepted the situation, but really they're resigning. because healthy wood energy makes decisions, makes a plan, and follows through, right? Um, both of these, both deficiency and excess, they arise when we reserve the right to avoid what conscience already knows. So much of integrity for wood is about listening to their conscience, trusting it, making a decision, and then acting upon it with integrity. So when we avoid, especially for a wood type, if you avoid, you will get sick. First, you'll get angry, then you'll get repressed, then depressed, um, and then it leads to shutdown, into collapse. And it's easy to spot a wood type that is not facing their lives, who's avoiding things, because they begin to collapse and withdraw into themselves. And it's a different kind of collapse than metal or water collapse because it's angry. They're pissed because they're not being who there's not a natural expression of wood energy, right? So the central tenet of wood, like I said in the beginning, is face everything and avoid nothing. The way that the ego maintains control in our lives is through ambivalence, ambiguity. It's maintaining the right to constantly go back and forth to preserve the status quo. The ego maintains the status quo. If you remember in the introductory class, I talked about the four S's, five S's, I don't know what it was. And this maintaining status quo means I'm not going to change. I don't need to change. You don't need to change. We can avoid until the end of time. I'm going to avoid the things I need to change in myself. Nothing needs to change here. And how do you prevent change from happening? You just go back and forth and you be kind of ambivalent and wishy-washy. That's the ego's way of staying in control. Freedom comes from choosing honest direction over avoidance. I'm choosing a direction, I'm making a fucking difficult decision, and then you go for it. Even though it's terrifying. It takes courage, right? Um, so a little bit about wood as a spiritual path as it relates to relationship. Try to do this in 1 minute. Um, wood awakens through the conscience made visible. So when you're in touch with that quiet voice of the soul that knows what's right for you, it knows what the right decision is. It knows whether a relationship is right or wrong. It knows if you need to make this decision, even though it's difficult. It's the wood energy awakens and comes to life when you listen to that voice and then you take action. As awareness grows through meditation and mindfulness practice, repression becomes observable. We start to feel in our body what we're repressing. And we start to have a more creative relationship with the unconscious, and all that repressed material starts to rise. And then we also start to see in relationships that when we're triggered in relationship, it's usually a projection. So it's something we are not looking at in ourselves that's getting triggered by something in the other person. And we're saying, oh, it's all that person. So that shows up as addictions or allergies, right? I don't want to be around that. And then we also start to see control when we're trying to control people or control situations as rooted in fear. And that fear is what are we not looking at? So as wood energy matures, we start to face our triggers not with avoidance, but with curiosity. Why am I triggered right now? What am I avoiding in myself? We start to look clearly at what is being triggered and why. And we start to recognize the saying that um, came from Rudy, he's a wonderful teacher, where he says, you spot it, you got it. If something is triggering you, find it in yourself. That one practice is profoundly transformative. If you are annoyed by something in somebody, or you don't really like them, or whatever it is about other people that you're not into, find it in yourself. Why? What is it? What's getting triggered in me? Right? Oh, is it 9:12? I was looking at my phone, which said we're an hour in. So, um, okay, I'm gonna leave it there so that because this is a lot of material to kind of cover, and I'm gonna follow up with um an email with just a couple last observations that I wanted to share today, but my big mouth, my wood energy can't shut itself up. Um, with just the last couple things that I kind of wanted to share around anger and some attachment theory stuff related to wood element. And the last thing I kind of want to just share about it is that integrity is actually relief. It's not an effort. You know, integrity means giving up this right to repress material. And even though it's scary, if our way of dealing in life has been to repress things that are uncomfortable, as we build that muscle and we start taking responsibility for what we know is true in our conscience, and we start to act in alignment with conscience, it's a profoundly transformative and liberating experience. And if you're not a wood element type, having wood element type people in your life is great because if they are cultivated, they will tell you the truth. And they can be incredible cheerleaders and people whose energy can really help lift you up. Um, growth doesn't come from force. It comes from seeing clearly and choosing honestly. And wood energy is really about honesty and integrity. So I'll stay on for a little bit if folks have questions. And I wanted to share as a last thing that we just sent out our seasonal tea clubs for the spring, which is the wood element energy. So the teas in the seasonal tea club are all wood element teas. And I went deeper into the wood element in that write-up. So you can drink those teas and go deeper into wood element work in the spring if that's something that appeals to you. The teas are pretty awesome this spring, if I do say so myself. Um, and also the ritual kits are great if you want deeper instruction on formal tea practice and meditation. Um, and the last thing I just want to share to this community, because you're engaging this material, is Living Tea there's some very exciting and big things happening in the next year at Living Tea, and we just opened a fundraising round. And so there are potential investors coming into the company, and essentially over the next 3 months, all of my time is allocated to these conversations and sharing kind of what's going on deeper within the company and what our vision is and where we're going over the coming years. So if you are somebody or you know somebody who would be curious about what that opportunity looks like, then email us because it's pretty cool what's going on. And I'm, hoping to raise this money just within our community. Um, so if that piques your interest, please reach out. Or if you know somebody who you think could be interested in that, please reach out. Okay. I hope that wasn't too much information, and I hope there is some good stuff there. And at the end of this, in the last class, I'm going to try to tie together how all these elements can sort of work together dynamically because they're holographic and they all inform and influence each other. So it's really about learning how to work harmoniously with them to bring more harmony and depth to our relationships. Okay, I'm done. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat or has some questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining this morning, and I hope people are meditating because really that's where this all comes together ultimately. All right.
Hi there, Collins.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, hi. Thank you for that. Another wonderful, insightful week. So, I just have a question about wood and the liver, and it's a little bit personal, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I've definitely got a lot of wood energy in me. A lot of what you were saying. I've known that anyway. And about 25 years ago, I had a bit of an accident. I'm looking at the mountains there behind you, and I had an accident up in the Alps, up in the snow, deep, deep, deep into the Alps, into a place called Aosta. Anyway, I tore my liver in the accident, which was very painful. And I went into a coma and that. But anyway, I've obviously completely recovered from that. It's 25 years ago.
You look great.
Thank you. The helicopter ride was something else.
I bet.
But in terms of the wood energy and the liver, so you were talking about the complexity. I never knew that the liver was the most complex organ. And I just wonder, I also was aware that the liver could heal itself. And I
Mhm.
would just love you to speak a little bit to when a liver gets quite badly ruptured, yet it manages to heal itself, and yet you're already a person who has that kind of wood energy going on. Just is I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I used to love whiskey, and it used to get me really red in the face. So yeah, but just anything. I don't know. I'd love just to hear anything you might have to say about that. I haven't really got a direct question. It's a little bit more just anything that might come up for you.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that okay?
yeah, there's something called angiogenesis, which is the body's ability for cellular repair. Um, and not all organs in the body. I mean, of course, the body is a profound, miraculous self-healing mechanism, right? And the liver in particular, because of its complexity, like I was saying, there's over 500 metabolic, excretory, regulatory, and detoxification functions that the liver performs. I mean, it's unbelievable how much the liver does in the body. And this kind of hub of regulation and coordination and detoxification and cleansing the blood and fat metabolism and hormone production, on and on and on, um, is kind of miraculous, you know? Um, the specific question, though, around the liver's capacity for repair, what's called a hepatocellular repair, I don't. I don't know that I understand liver pathology and liver function, but I don't know that it's something that I'm really equipped to speak to in the way that a biomedical or Western doctor could, who focuses specifically on liver function.
Well, may I say that this wasn't coming from a kind of a materialistic sense. It was coming more from a philosophical sense.
Ah, hmm.
Sorry, I didn't make that clear. I was just making the point
Well,
that
yeah, I can speak to that, which is
yeah,
actually, there's something important there.
because you mentioned just to
So,
say, oh, just sorry, you mentioned the Hun spirit, and
uh-huh.
you mentioned so much that I really relate to, and I just love to see if there's any correlation between the actual liver, the rupture, and just being a very woody person. I just
Yes. Yeah,
right,
yeah. Yeah. So kind of from a psycho, spiritual, emotional perspective, I can
yeah,
definitely speak to that. So in the
great.
springtime, think about when the spring arrives, right? In China, I think it's called Qingming, like the first rain. And, that's important for tea lovers. But
Mm.
um, what happens when we transition from yin to yang, from the winter yin to the yang of spring, is those big transitional times are usually a bit, I don't want to use the word violent, but volatile because the yin and yang energies are shifting. And so it tends to get very windy or very rainy or very climactically volatile in the transitional periods, right? And specifically because that wood energy is so strong, it's this emergence of yang energy. Everything's coming to life. The whole natural world is awakening, right? It tends to be very abrupt and very strong energy. And if you haven't cultivated yin energy in the winter and you're a wood type, when spring energy hits, it can be really kind of like you might not notice it, but you may notice yourself irritable, irascible, restless. It's like hard to focus. And the way that trees grow, so there's the kind of volatility of the climate, of the environment in the spring. But then if you look at the way that trees grow, they don't grow like in one steady, slow thing. They grow in growth spurts, right? Which is the rings on the trees or on plants. And actually, there's been this interesting study at Findhorn, a spiritual community in England, where
Scotland.
in Scotland, yeah, where they put acupuncture needles at what are almost like neurovascular junctures in the body, where our acupuncture points are at those growth points on trees, and the trees and the plants would grow more healthily because they were unblocking the chi from those little growth spots. Anyway,
Wow.
acupuncture on plants, wild stuff. So, growth that is healthy has these a natural cadence of growth and then pause and then growth and then pause and growth and pause. Whereas if it's unhealthy, it's kind of rigid and jagged and it's not a smooth growth pattern. And so it's kind of knowing when to express and then rest and express. It's the natural flow of yin and yang, right? And I say that because a tree that is too hard, too rigid, or a person who's too rigid, too much wood energy, right? I can see where I'm going and I'm going to get there on this path. And if anything gets in the way, I'm going to bulldoze it, right? That kind of like, or I'm right and this is the way. And there's no flexibility to the tree. It's too rigid and too hard, it will break. So that in when the liver gets too hard, that's a sign of liver cirrhosis or, many of the hepatic pathologies have to do with the hardening of the liver, right? And so liver energy has to be flexible. So if you think about bamboo, there's a reason bamboo is used poetically in so much Taoist and Buddhist literature. Because bamboo, what's unique about bamboo?
It can move and it's very small, but it can move in any direction and then stay upright.
Flexible, right? And why is it flexible? Because it's hollow. So this notion of emptiness that we find in Taoism in particular, and in Mahayana Buddhism,
Yeah.
of being empty. And when we talked about in the water element meditation, the practice of being able to move into the dimension of the self, which is the ground of being, wood element is about becoming, whereas water element is about being. So it's the place in us that's empty, it's unvictimized, untraumatized, has never been abused, it is pure potential, and it is infinitely open. There's no problem. In a space of emptiness in the self, there's no problem, right? The ego doesn't create problems when there's emptiness. So that's the space we cultivate through meditation, the ability to say, there's this aspect of the self that doesn't have any problems. And can I rest there, right? When the evolutionary wood energy force comes out of that emptiness, out of the potential, that's what's called Jingsheng. So, or it's when the heart, the vision of the heart and the potential in the kidneys align, the heart-kidney axis. And it's the wood element that brings that pure potentiality up to the heart and expresses into the world as destiny. So, so this wood element that's healthy, it's hollow in the center, it's empty. It's not so identified with a rigid identity, right? It can let go. Um, and that kind of psycho-spiritually is essential for rootedness in the wood element. So in the email follow-up, I'll talk a little bit about roots, the root system. Your root system of your tree is like your family, your childhood environment, your conditioning, your familial influences, your cultural influences. The introjects and the things that we took in during our developmental years to create our root system, have you cleaned those up? Because if there's a lot of trauma and shadow material down in the root system, you get root rot. And even one root rotting can make the whole tree sick, right? And so when we do metal element work, we got to chop off, metal's cutting. We got to chop off the roots that aren't healthy, or at the very least, we have to look at them and transform it alchemically so that the whole tree can be healthy. When the root system isn't healthy, it doesn't have grounding to hold on to the earth. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that um, it means that there's repressed material, and wood energy can't thrive, that expressive, expansive energy. It can't thrive if there's all this repressed material. So working with the wood element is turning and facing and not avoiding and allowing everything to rise to the surface and to manifest it as a healthy plan, a healthy vision, and really being in touch with the conscience in the heart. What is the heart communicating needs to change here, wants to happen, right? So, again, at the beginning, face everything, avoid nothing, and develop an honest relationship to the conscience so that you can have that integrity that creates uprightness, right? That is what wood element is all about. And it's profound. It's beautiful energy, wood energy, when it's not repressed and angry, and aggressive. So,
Thank you so much, Colin.
yeah, you're welcome.
It's
Thank
been
you.
amazing, amazing.
Hi, Colin. Kelly here. How are
Hi,
you?
Paul.
Another great session. And I'll be really quick because I know we're out of time. You had mentioned about inner integrity, inner coherence, and you made reference to the Yellow Emperor's classic of medicine. Where exactly can I go to read more about that part?
Uh, mm,
Or you can just,
so the Huangdi De Qing, right, is the Yellow Emperor's classic.
yep,
The best translation I've read is by Mao Xingni. The
right.
last name's Ni, Ni. Oh, there we go. So he
Okay.
was one of my teachers at school,
Wow.
who wrote that book. And I like that book because it definitely doesn't water anything down, but it is really accessible. Some of the other translations I've tried to work with are kind of um, a little bit obscure and kind of hard to understand, and that one is not. Um, you can look actually in the index in the back of that book and look up Zhongqi, uh, Zhong, and go to the reference material in there.
Okay. All right.
Zhongqi isn't one qi. It's actually a combination of your Wei qi, which is like your immune system, along with the inner harmony and functionality between the different organs. Is everything internally working in harmony, right? And are your boundaries clear? And is there inner coherence? And that is really health, right? So it's having balance, which is the basis of Chinese medicine. When there is balance, we are not susceptible to the pathogenic qi. So it's this clarity, it's inner clarity, which I'm using the word integrity, right? Is the cultivation of Zhongqi. It's not about doing something. It's about actually removing repression and things that are in the way so that energy can flow freely and there's not stagnation in the system. The last thing I want to say about Zhongqi is that, you know, one of my teachers, Lonnie Jarrett, he says we use over 90% of our metabolic energy to repress material or suppress. So suppress means that we're kind of like aware, but we push it down and then it comes up every couple weeks. I should do that thing. And then oh yeah, I should, but you don't actually do it, push it back down, but we're aware of it. Repressed material is material we've shoved into the unconscious and we might not even be aware of, right? So in meditation and in facing everything, we're saying to the unconscious, I want to have a creative and open relationship here. And any material that needs to surface, I invite it to the surface. Now, if somebody that is um, stopping, avoiding, and repressing, and that is necessary for the Zhongqi to flow freely through the body, to be in integrity. The one thing I will say, which I mentioned last week, if somebody has like real trauma from childhood or some real abusive experiences or real difficulty, I don't recommend just like diving into, Jungian shadow work. I recommend working with, a therapist or somebody who is skilled in EMDR or somatic therapy or something to help them navigate difficult material as it arises. That was a
Great.
not necessarily long-winded answer, but hopefully something in there was helpful.